in starting out with the playing cards, we can start with the rounded rectangle, or we can start with the box, um, just the rectangle tool. But I'll just start with the rectangle tool, and we know it's going to be longer than it is going to be wide. So I'm just going to click once, and in the height, I'll say uh, maybe 4.5, 4.5, and then maybe in the width, maybe it's 2.5, something like that, and then press OK. So, maybe if it's too long, like if you think the card is too long, you can always go into the properties and bring the size down to maybe 4, 3.75, whatever it is that you think the height should be of the card. In terms of the rounded corners, you can click and pull, and you can round these as much as you think the card should be round, but I think probably around a 0.25 is probably a good rounded edge for the playing cards. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to set these guys aside, like basically just to show you how to make that shadow, right? So I'm going to take this, hold Option to duplicate, and one will be on top of the other by pressing Command Shift right bracket, and I'll just kind of offset them. And if you want to do it this way, you want to do it this way, it doesn't matter. But what you want to do is you want to be able to kind of take these and just kind of play with how they overlap in their rotation, and it doesn't matter which one is on which one's on top or bottom. It's the way you feel like it should look. Okay. So now the thing that's going to sell this idea of the depth is going to be the drop shadow that you put on the card that's on top. So this particular card, if we use like effect drop shadow, it's not gonna come out like we want it to, because it's always gonna load slow and fast, and then we don't necessarily have the amount of control that we want. So basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna make a duplicate copy of one of those cards, and the one that's on top, and we send it to the back, and basically turn this from white to black, right? So I change the color, the fill color, from white to black. And when you do that, you are changing the placement of the shadow so that if it's further away, then it's going to look like the card is further away from the other card. The other indication with shadow that we recognize is basically when the shadow is further. Let's say it's further at the top and then closer at the bottom. That means that the bottom is going to be closer to the card, and the top is going to be further away. So for instance, if I rotate this slightly this way, that means the light is coming from the upper right direction, and this card is kind of leaning forward towards me. So if I do something like that, it's giving me this indication that the light is hitting it here. Now this part of the shadow will no longer exist because it's not part of this card, right? It's not bouncing off anything. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take the opacity down to look at how this interacts. with the shape. So I bring my opacity down to about, let's say about 25%. And this is basically what it looks like, you know, as it interacts with the shape. And I can rotate it slightly, and I can move it over. And basically I can say, okay, this is how the light is hitting it, and I want it to look sort of like this. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is I want this shadow to stop right there. Like I want the shadow to only be contained inside the shape. Okay. Now, two things that you can do here. One, we can use what's called a clipping mask, or the other thing is I can just basically cut this shape so that we don't see the rest of it. And so I'm going to choose for the quick option is to cut the shape. And the reason why I want to cut the shape is because if I use a clipping mask and then I have the rest of this information, it's going to take the computer a little bit longer to calculate all the rest of the information still. So I want to have as least amount of shape and points as possible. So with my pen tool, basically what I want to do is I want to add an anchor point or a few anchor points. So with this, I'm going to add anchor point and add anchor point. All right. And so what these anchor points are going to allow me to do is I'm going to move this anchor point here. I'm going to move this anchor point there. And all these anchor points here, I'm going to basically take off. So I'm going to grab this point, bring it over here, use my minus delete anchor point here, and I'm going to take away the points. Just take those points away. If you want to see past this, you can either do one or two things. You can select this, go in your layers, and hide. Or you can go into your outline mode and basically kind of manipulate those points. But the main idea behind this is that we're taking this information and we're just putting it so that it is not anywhere else like outside this area. And when I bring this back, I can take this and move it over. Okay. And you don't have to worry about if the shape is precise, because we're going to use the Gaussian blur, and the Gaussian blur is going to allow us to have the soft edge on this shape. So this one little shape here is our shadow, and inside our layers palette we can double click on this, name this shadow. This card is going to be our top card, so we know that that's going to be the top card.
If you look at the smartboard, you can't really. That's where.
Oh, you can't see it on the screen. Okay.
We understood everything.
Right.
Now we got.
And then the bottom card. Okay. So yeah, the screen is a little bit off. I'm not sure why. I'll try to fix that in a little bit. But so I'm renaming these cards. Let me see if I can bring this over so you can see it. You can't even. I wonder why that's like that. Let's cut off.
Where's the Gaussian blur?
Gaussian blur. We're gonna do Gaussian blur in a second. So with the Gaussian blur, basically we're gonna go up to Effect, blur, Gaussian blur. And as you increase the radius, the blur becomes softer. Now you on the projector screen, you can't really see the value, but my percentage value, let's see if it changes. So I'm increasing it for the video, but on the screen, I'm increasing it so you guys can see it on the projector. But on the video, this is kind of like very dark. Like I put it up to 76, and really I want it down to about 30%. Okay. But here you guys can see this on the projector screen. Okay. If you wanted to readjust that blur inside the appearance palette, you can click on blur and you can bring the radius down to have a sharper blur, so it's not so soft. And I put it down to about 23.8, and now you have more of a concise shadow that looks like this is giving it that overlap. And the cool thing about this is that, let's say, you want to move this shadow around or rotate it, you can grab it, rotate it, and it will still give you that that sense that this part of the card is coming up, and then this part of the card is a little bit further back. So that's a good thing. Okay. And the computer doesn't have to calculate all the rest of that card. It's just this little piece, which is cool. So that is basically the quick part of how we make the card shape and the shadow to make these cards look like they have depth.